following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to Ion Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz and here with City Manager Mark Rohloff. He's a frequent guest and we're always happy to have him on. So we're just going to get right into things. Mark, thanks for being here tonight. We appreciate it.
Great to be here.
One of the things we want to talk about for sure is the upcoming budget, because that's, you know, money, dollars and cents is always on everybody's minds. So we want to talk about that, and it's getting close to budget time. You know, we're taping this the beginning part of September, but you know, that the time is flying.
Yeah, it sure is.
And so you guys are going to have to be looking at this real soon. And I mean, you already have some sense of where things are going. So we want to talk about that for sure. But want to get some of these other smaller issues out of the way first.
Sure.
And I don't even know where to start. But I'm going to start with recycling bins, I guess, because one of the things was, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, a press release came out that you guys now had, for a lot of the people who had gotten recycling bins, they got large ones, and then they didn't like the big ones, and they wanted smaller ones, and they were on a waiting list. There were like 400, I think.
We started with about 400 people on the waiting list, and after we went out and asked people, okay, would you really like to exchange, about half of those decided that they wanted to keep what they had. So that was, I had asked people to be a little patient, and half the group felt that they were okay with what they had. I think a lot of the people who chose to switch back were elderly people who just don't generate a lot of garbage or recyclables in the first place. And then people in smaller homes where they don't have, their doors just can't fit one of those recycling bins. And so we were able to do those change outs. And if you haven't gotten your change out and you did tell us that, yeah, you were interested, just keep putting your recycling card out. As much as you don't like it, you won't get rid of it until you put it out by the car, by the front, and then we'll just exchange it over the course of the next few weeks. And so by the end of September we'll be all changed over. So
do they have to have anything in it, or if they don't, if it's empty, can they just still put that out?
As long as it's out, we'll just exchange it. We know that we're sending a different truck out to do the exchange, but we want to make sure it's empty before we haul it away.
Sure, yeah, no, I understand. But you're not, there's a small price difference between the two that we were all charged last year. It was, you know, $4, I think, or $5, something like that. You're not refunding money to people. What they paid for the large bin is what they've paid, right?
Correct, because when we ordered a smaller number of the smaller bins, the unit price went up, and so we were effectively paying about the same amount of money, and we had to put, you know, all the little things that we put in, having the specific stencil with the city's logo, so that identified us as a City of Oshkosh bin, and all those other things. Right. It pretty much cost us the same amount of money. So there were some people who felt they should get a refund, but just the handling costs. And from our standpoint, we did offer them an opportunity to request a smaller card originally. Right. When they didn't do it, there are, I think somebody referred to it as a restocking fee. There are costs associated with it. Yeah. So it was our restocking fee.
And it's less than the 15% you pay for a lot of electronic items in the store.
That's right, a lot more.
It is. So as far as the recycling bins go, you know, we talked about this, I think, the last time you were here, but the program's working out pretty well, right?
Oh, yeah. I think we've seen over a 20% increase in the number in the volume of recyclables that are going in. So it is appealing to some people who in the past maybe were getting a little tired of trying to separate things. Now they just throw it in the one cart, and it seems to be working. At least the numbers are bearing that out. So we're happy that that's the case. I know I had some concerns about it too, because you worry that in the past you kept the papers separated so they didn't get all wet, and obviously when you throw a juice bottle in or something, a little dampness is going to get on it. But apparently that's not a problem in the processing, at least not now. So it's going well, and we'll keep trudging forward with it.
Well, that's good. Now, one of the things that has come up as we've seen these bins out throughout our community is people are leaving them in, there's leaving them out on the terrace for days at a time. The garbage is picked up and the bin is emptied, but then it still sits out there for maybe 3, 4, sometimes longer
Sometimes
days
permanently.
afterwards. Yeah, and so I know that there was some talk of the council, looking at redoing the ordinance with respect to where those bins would have to be, whether it be behind the house or in a garage. What's the status of the council looking at that?
Well, I can't blame the council for any of that because it hasn't been brought to them yet, but they did ask us to take a look at that because, especially in some of the older areas where the lots are smaller, it's kind of hard to hide that, and if you can't keep it in your garage, you're allowed to keep it outside, but some people have been keeping it literally in their front yard on a permanent basis, and that's just not an acceptable thing. So I've asked Public Works to put together an ordinance that at least the council can take a look at and consider, because we need to keep them out of the backyards. Maybe side yards are going to be a little too much to ask, but certainly front yards is just ridiculous, and I don't think it's enough that people are not taking them back to where they're supposed to be. I think people are choosing to leave them in their front yards, which is in any neighborhood. I don't care what part of the city you're in. That's just not an acceptable thing. So I've asked Public Works to take a look at that. The council asked me to ask Public Works to do that. So it's one of those things that's on our to-do list, and we need to get that within the next couple months, because as winter hits, it's just going to look more unsightly. And we've heard from enough residents that it's a concern they have.
See, I don't think it looks so bad being in the front yard, provided it's up against the house, maybe in a corner or something. But there are, especially in the Central City District, those lots are small. Some people don't really have a backyard per se, and they may not even have a garage. So, there are some situations where that might be a little difficult for them. And then, of course, you've also got a lot of elderly people who live in, the Central City District, and it might be, a little difficult for them getting it back, especially with the snow and the ice. Are those kinds of things, Mark, being looked at and considered in drafting this, or are you just going to have a hard and fast thing that says not in any front yards, period?
I think that's part of the dilemma in us getting it out, because there's no perfect ordinance. There's imperfections no matter what happens.
Right.
And I think that's the struggle that Public Works is having, because they know that there are certain areas where it's going to be very tough for us to enforce that. And to put an ordinance in place that's unenforceable, it really is a waste of time. And it frustrates the public because they expect us to have an ordinance and that we follow it. So that's been our probably our biggest stumbling block on this, is how do we address areas, whether it's in the Central City, but older areas, just in other words, where there's not much room in the back. And if we can figure out a way to get people to put it in side yards and that'll be a little more acceptable. So those are all the issues that we have to eventually struggle with.
Although on a corner lot, you don't have a side yard. You got 2 front yards.
And there you go
There's
again.
another dilemma.
That's a big dilemma that I think probably have heard that issue more than the folks who say they don't have much of a backyard. It's people on corner lots saying, well, where do I put it now? I'm exposed no matter where I go.
Yeah. Yeah. So any sense of, you mentioned winter coming and it's going to be more unsightly. Is this something you're helping to bring to the council before winter?
I'd like to get it before the winter, because the concern that people have is they get, with snow and whatnot, they really look even more unsightly if they're not put in a proper place. So I'd like to get going on it by winter time.
All right. Well, that's one item off of our list. All right. I almost chuckle when I say this, but it is something that people are seriously looking at. We are looking at, not me, but you guys are looking at the possibility of allowing people in the city limits to have chickens in their backyards. And I don't know. I mean, I've read the pros and I've read the cons. Just kind of enlighten viewers. See, you're chuckling too.
I'm not clucking though. That's
You're not clucking. That's good. I like that. You know, it is kind of humorous. You know, we're making light of it, but you know, enlighten us as to you know, the reasons why some people want to do this. I mean, it is kind of I forget the word that they've used. It's more of a wholesome approach, sort of, to eggs. So maybe you can say that better than me.
I don't know if I can necessarily. You know, this is a relatively new issue for me. I hadn't been following it a great deal. I know we had some residents who had asked about it. Not a great deal of them, but periodically people have been asking. And from my standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, it was, no, we don't allow chickens, and it's an urban area. But there is a trend these days where people are saying, well, from a sustainability standpoint and being more self-sufficient, to whether you're planting a garden in your yard or going to a community garden, this is another, I guess, the next generation of
organic
this type
farming
of thing.
and that kind of
yeah,
thing.
all that. But we have to take a look at it from a variety of standpoints, and we've been in the council at the last meeting directed staff to do some research, and we're going to be referring it to our Sustainability Advisory Board, and they'll have a certain perspective on it, because I think that goes to you know, doing things for more organic farming and organic methods of getting foodstuffs for your family without going to the grocery store, I guess driving and all that. Again, I'm still learning about this myself, because it struck me as odd too. So you know, I have to be open-minded about that, and council asked me to look at those things. I have to really look at those, and there are other communities doing it. So I'm curious in a sort of way as well. But I've also got the health department looking at it, because our sanitarians have a concern about it. We've come across people who do have chickens and other animals in their homes and their residences, and we have a pretty strict, you know, nothing other than, you know, domestic cats and dogs and birds and fish and things like that. But we have to address these issues when they come up, and they're concerned from a health standpoint. One of the arguments with this big issue with salmonella and commercial eggs, that this would reduce it. Well, we want to make sure that is the case, because when it's not regulated except for how many you have and how many distance you have, we're not going to be going in there to make sure that necessarily the conditions are conducive to producing eggs and producing safe eggs. So when you get into that, how much regulatory authority do you want the government to have to regulate something? And a health issue could be there. If people don't take care of it there, you could have small outbreaks of salmonella. And so we have to take a look at that from the health standpoint. And then from the regulatory standpoint, the ordinances that I've read so far, and I know Nina's has done this, and Madison and a few other communities, and they have many different requirements. Most of them have to do with number of chickens. 4 or 5 seem to be the running total that you have. No roosters, big time. I guess no cock-a-doodle-doo type of thing. That's a huge issue.
Buy an alarm clock.
Yeah,
right?
Buy an alarm clock, or get your cell phone and set it or something. But roosters are one of the other issues that are a big concern. And then setbacks from yards. And most of what I've seen has been about a 25-foot setback. And if you get to certain areas of our city, some of our older areas, they're only about 44-foot wide lots. So when you do that, you've effectively prohibited them in those areas. So we have to take a look at those and say, how can that work? And then the most interesting feature I saw was there's a provision in several of these ordinances where you need to get 50% of your neighbors to agree that you can have chickens. And maybe this will be a good way for people to get to know their neighbors. A lot of people don't know their neighbors these days, but when you add that provision, then you are getting into neighbor conflicts. And I'll tell you what, Cheryl, those are some of the worst things. I prefer to do a lot of things even budget stuff that you're talking about, rather than deal with neighbor conflicts, because they're lasting and they become very deep rooted and can be pretty vicious. And I wouldn't want to create a situation where neighbors were going after each other. So we have to be very careful about that. And then when you say neighbors, well, what's a neighbor? Is it the neighbor across the street who doesn't see your backyard, who doesn't see, may not even know you have a chicken, or is it everybody behind you up and down your backyards? So we'd have to define what that is, and then what percent of your neighbors? If you get one neighbor, does that completely shoot it? If you live on a corner, like we talked about with carts, if you live on a corner, what's the radius? So all those things have to get taken a look at. So you're going to have zoning and planning people involved, as well as our sustainability board and obviously the health issues. So it's going to be a while so that we can analyze these things. And then what I would envision is the sustainability board would take a look at it from the sustainability aspect. Planning and zoning would take a look at it from the zoning. And then if there are some disagreements between the different boards and commissions, we may need to do like Congress does a conference committee where you get people to reconcile it all so that everybody's viewpoint. So you can chuckle about it a little bit, but if you want to do something like this seriously, you just can't throw out an ordinance and say, okay, well, there it is, and we'll just adopt it tomorrow. You really have to take a look at all the consequences of making a big decision like that.
Well, I understand people who want to do organic farming and have a more sustainable society. I get that. I'm all for that. I'm not sure that I'm for it with regard to the chickens, but this business of salmonella outbreak, somebody mentioned to me last night then, well, okay, then what about when we have the next mad cow disease outbreak? If we have a beef problem, will the city then want to allow everyone to have a small cow in their yard? I mean, and we're laughing about that too, but where does it truly end? When we get into helping to prevent these diseases from happening and these outbreaks. So
maybe it'll open up. I got an email from somebody the other day that said, well, we should be supporting some of the farms out in the outlying areas and use them. Maybe this will open people's eyes to other possibilities that are out there. I don't know what eventually will come of this. One of the arguments that was proposed at the council meeting was that if we did have the ordinance, maybe we would sort of bring people out that have been secretly hiding chickens. But I think you have to take a look at those issues that you're raising, because at what point where do you draw the line? If you allow chickens, then what else do you allow? And do you allow ducks or geese or something like that? I worked in a community that had wild peacocks, and let me tell you, those were pretty noisy, and you get into the noise issue, and then it becomes a quality of life issue, and how do you balance those things out? And so those are things you can't take lightly, and hopefully at least the process will open people's eyes to say, what do we really want to achieve, and how do we want to do it? Because something like this could become a very divisive issue with the public, and we have to make sure we're doing it right before we start jumping into it big time.
Right. Well, and then there's also the issue, there are some people out there who do slaughter their own chickens. And do we want to have that happening within the city limits? I suspect it may already be to a small degree, but if we're allowing people to then have and raise chickens for the egg benefit, are we maybe looking at having more of this slaughtering going on? And that's another issue.
Yeah, that was another provision that I failed to mention. That is pretty common in most of the ordinances, that slaughtering's prohibited. So if it brought to light the fact that people might be slaughtering chickens, that's a whole other issue. And I think at that point most people would say, wait a minute, that's crossing the line, because we're not here to be slaughtering chickens. If you want to have a few little eggs, that might be one thing. But every ordinance I've read has prohibited anything like that. So. But you have to cover every one of those bases. You just can't can't throw an ordinance out there, adopt it, and see how it goes. You really need to think this through pretty well.
Well, and you talk about supporting local farmers and so forth. There's a wonderful farmers market that's here in the parking lot of City Hall on Saturdays. Of course, summer's coming to an end now, but there's also a farmers market that is over on the west side of town. It's on Sawyer Street, and I don't know what kind of business they're getting, but this place is open. It seems like 24/7. They're there all hours of the night. I looked out the window the other night at like 3:30 in the morning, and they were still open. And I don't know what kind of, I think it's great. If all of a sudden you have a burning need for something at that hour of the morning.
I need an ear of corn.
Yeah, or a watermelon or something, I don't know. But, I don't know what kind of business they're getting at that hour of the night that, does it really pay for them to be open? But it's, support your local farmers,
Oh, sure. I've heard that the eggs at the farmers markets have been just going like crazy. They've been selling out within an hour right now, and
wow.
maybe it's going to bring more attention to local farmers. And
sure.
If anybody will win at the end, if the local farmer wins, that's probably a good thing.
Sure. Well, now that we've talked about chickens for a while, the whole point of that was brought up because of sustainability and because it's a changing of the times, if you will. And the other thing that's a changing of the times is, I'm going to bring up dogs in parks again. There are far more communities that allow dogs in their parks than there are communities that allow people to raise chickens. So where are we at with the dogs in the park thing? Is anything, has that just kind of stalled for right now, or?
Well, I think it kind of stalled a little bit, but it was really due to public feedback. Go back in time a little bit. Last year there was an issue that was raised because we began to enforce some dogs walking in the trails over and around Carl Traeger School, and really it's officially called a park, but it really is just a trail that people just go around and round, and people had been taking their dogs there for a number of years without realizing that they couldn't. And then when it was brought to our attention, we began to enforce it, and that's when the first issue came up saying, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And the Parks Board recommended and the council approved allowing dogs in that area.
And they're also allowed on the Wyowash Trail, aren't they?
Yeah, but that's not a city park.
Right,
so
that's a county thing.
That's a
in
county
fact,
thing.
it goes into other counties as well.
Right.
So
then we did our budget survey this past year, and the council asked, would you throw this question in there, even though it's not budget related, just throw it in there and just kind of get an idea of where the public is. And the public was solidly divided. It was as divisive and as polarized an issue as you could see. It was a solid third that said, allow dogs in parks, no restrictions. Another one that said never allow dogs in parks under any circumstances. And a third was, well, maybe consider dogs in parks under certain circumstances. So it was totally, it didn't give the council any guidance whatsoever. And I think the council took pause with that and didn't give us any further direction on it. I think the issue is going to keep coming back. It's something we have to look at because there is a third of the people think it should be, a third of the people think it shouldn't, and the other third are okay with something partial. So there's going to be some divisiveness on it, and obviously some people will disagree. But I think the Parks Board will probably have to take a look at it again. We have a new parks director. This is all new to him in terms of it being here in Oshkosh. It really comes back to personal responsibility. You know, you've got great dog owners. You got great dog owners. You don't have to worry about those people.
Yep.
You could let them do anything they want. They're still going to pick up after their dogs. They're still going to keep them on the leash and not let them run loose. And then there are people you can have all the rules in the world, and they're just not going to. They're not going to follow the law, and they're going to be irresponsible. And that's one of those things we're going to have to balance out.
And they're probably the ones who are already taking their dogs in the park and just not getting caught.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know. Well, it sounds like
you sound like one of those folks who would like to see more dogs in parks, and I think
I am. I'm a dog owner, have been all my life, and I do think that there are far more responsible dog owners than there are irresponsible ones.
I think that's a fair statement.
You know, and I don't know. I just think we need to start allowing dogs in parks, but I'm not in favor of just having no, you know, kind of limits on this. You know, they should be on a leash and, you know, not just allowed to run free and that kind of thing. And, you know, so I'm all in favor of certain provisions being attached to it. But, you know, I'm hearing you say a third, no provisions whatsoever, just let them go. And another third, yeah, let them there, but with some kind of restrictions. And then a third who just don't want them. So that, Mark, that's 2/3 now that will allow. They would like to see them allowed in the park.
That's
you know,
true.
give or take a little bit. So that's an overwhelming majority. So I think you guys should work on that. Okay. Let's see, we want to talk a little bit about the Pioneer Inn. This is somewhat old news in that the comments by Mayor Esslinger about, you know, possible condemnation, that happened a little while ago, but it's happened since you were on the show last. And so maybe you can just kind of clarify where things are at with the Pioneer Inn. Is anything being done with this place, and are they targeted for condemnation?
They're not targeted for condemnation.
Okay.
What the council asked me to do was to get an appraisal to determine what the value of that property might be at this time. They might consider trying to acquire the property if they thought that would be in the interest of the city, or at least let the people out in the open markets know this is what the property is valued at right now. Would anybody be interested in purchasing it? If anybody's interested in purchasing it, the city's kind of out of that equation. They have to deal with the property owner, which is Decades Property, which is based in Brookfield, I believe. I had a chance to meet with the owner several months ago after the council had asked about it. I wanted to talk to him face to face and just tell him what was going on. And he was concerned about the city's interest in it, not because he doesn't want to do anything. He would love to do something with it, but he is in the hotel business, and right now the market is very tough for anything with hotels. And even if he was interested in doing it, getting bank support for that would be really tough. And he just doesn't believe that any type of facility right now, except a very low-end facility, would be successful. And he is not interested in doing a low-end development. I think he's probably of enough means that he can hang on to this property for quite a while. So he was not interested in doing anything at this time, but he loves the property. He has said that. He said, I would love to do something with it, and one day I believe I will. Mm-hmm. So the council said, well, we'd like you to get it appraised. And the issue of condemnation, I want to make sure people, you know, our audience understands there's condemnation's used in two different ways. One term of condemnation is really when we tell somebody your property is not being taken care of, and it really now gets into raise or repair. Fix it, or we're going to tear it down. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is it's a legal term known as condemnation, when we say we're going to acquire your property, but it has to be for public purpose.
And that's eminent domain?
That's eminent domain. And so, but we can't, there have been some recent case laws that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually ruled in favor of the city, but the backlash from property owners, from private property owners, was pretty severe, and a lot of states changed their laws in response to that case. And they're saying you really should only be acquiring private property from somebody if you're going to use it for public purposes. You shouldn't be using it for, I take it from you and give it to another developer for private purposes, and that's been frowned upon as a result of this court case. If we were looking at it for a public park, which no one has discussed with me that concept, then condemnation might be an appropriate measure. But if we're looking at, we want to take it from this developer so another developer would do it, that becomes a much more complicated matter. It would be much better to put those two people together and say, why don't you negotiate a price and come to us when you're ready to do something, because we'd love to get something done out there. We're really a victim of what's going on in the markets. Banks are extremely tight with credit, and so we're still going to get the appraisal done. The gentleman who owns the property is pretty tough to catch. He travels a lot, and we want to be on the property so we can get a good appraisal. We just don't want to have to look from the the property line and say, well, it looks like the building is okay or not okay, therefore we're going to assign what could be considered an arbitrary value. We want to get inside the site, see how much value truly is in the building so that we can get a fair value, so we can say, look, this property is fixable and here's what it's worth, and then people get a better idea. And he hasn't officially given us permission to go on the property, so we haven't begun the appraisal because of that.
Okay. In the meantime, I haven't, from time to time I'd get out on the water and things like that, but I haven't this summer, and I haven't even driven down in that area. Are they at least, cutting the weeds and keeping graffiti off the side of the building and that kind of thing? Because I know that was an issue for a while.
Graffiti has been an issue, and we did bring it to his attention. When I met with Mr. Kierlieber, I mentioned that to him, and he suggested that we stay in touch with his property manager on site, because they still do operate the marina down there, and asked that we direct those questions to him. So if people do see it, I'm not a boater, so I haven't seen it, but people periodically have said there's graffiti out there, and normally anywhere else in the city, a police squad car is going to see graffiti, and they'll help the property owner take care of it. But out there on the boats, unless somebody tells us, we're not going to know. So we're still encouraging people to let us know if they see something, because it doesn't look good when you're out there on a boat. Even though it may not be a lot of people, that's our front door from the boating community standpoint. It's got to look nice, and he understands that, and he still wants to make it a marketable site, although not anytime real soon.
Sure. Well, you mentioned water, and so let's bring up the new slogan for the city, Oshkosh, Wisconsin's Event City. Now, I'm not really in favor of this too much. I have to pontificate here a little bit. I hate to be a naysayer, but we've been known as Oshkosh on the Water for years, and I understand the remarks. I think Wendy Hillsberg maybe made the comment about, well, there's a lot of cities in Wisconsin that are on the water, and they felt that through this whole study process and everything that calling us the event city for the state, it kind of defined us a little bit better, a little bit more specifically. And I would disagree with that, because just like there are many cities in Wisconsin that are on the water, there are also many cities in Wisconsin that have a lot of events, and it's what's done is done. The billboards are up, and the kickoff was held a week or two ago, but it just seems like it's kind of moving in a direction that we don't necessarily need to move in. They apparently see it differently, but is this new logo, these two tickets, where is this logo going to be used? Is this going to go on the city's website? I mean, are we actually doing away with the wave logo?
We don't have any intention of doing that, and unfortunately there was some perception that was going to happen. Is it a city logo? Is it a community logo? I see it more as a community logo, because the events that we're very proud of are not just in the city of Oshkosh, they're in the town of Nakaimai and the town of Oshkosh. So we haven't made any decision about how we're going to incorporate that. But one of the things about a brand is it has a shelf life that's much shorter than a corporate logo type of thing. And the wave is our corporate logo. Corporate logos tend to last a lot longer than a brand. And a shelf life for a brand can be 7 to 10 years. We've had the Wave logo for well over 20 years, probably close to 30 now. So we don't have any intention of changing it for the corporate city logo or anything like that. However, I think it's important for us to support it. The research was overwhelming, and while people don't necessarily see it as people who live in the community and just, such and such events here this weekend. We got Country USA's here, EAA's here. Most people know those things, but when we did the research with this group, and the city participated, the city was a partner along with the university and the chamber and the Northwestern and several others, Lutheran homes, and I'm missing somebody, and I apologize for missing those people.
Well, the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Of course, the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
They're the big one.
But it was really, how can we market ourselves to the outside? And while a lot of people recognize Oshkosh on the Water. Not everybody does. I had a friend who was Google Earth me and said, I didn't realize you're near so much water, Mark. So it isn't necessarily that case. We know it, and we certainly celebrate the water, but the idea was how can we best market ourselves to outsiders? And statistically, if you take a look at the number of events we have, we blow other communities away with the number of events we have. And this really struck me during the discussion right after I got here, was right after Public Enemies and Johnny Depp was here. And I heard other talk about, well, you know, I can't get my building permit done. And I heard complaints on certain levels of isolated things that we do every day. But then these big events, when Public Enemies was here, we were the greatest hosts in the world. And that's why I heard from everybody, inside, outside. And it's like, wow, we do this so well. That's really cool. And as we talked to other people, that was what the research said. So for somebody who's looking from the outside in, that's what the purpose of that is. It's really to market it. Now, it does take a bit of community pride, and it's not to take away the pride that we have in the water, because we've got some awesome facilities that we're still underutilizing. But how do we market ourselves to outsiders? I was at a convention last year for city managers, and I was in the exhibit hall just wandering around, and I had my badge on that said I was from Oshkosh, and some guy comes across the exhibit floor and said, "You're from Oshkosh? I want to tell you my family was there for Life Fest, and we had the greatest time. That is the greatest community." Well, it's awfully tough for me to say that events are not something that grab people's attention when this guy totally volunteers it. He literally came across the room to seek me out because he saw I was from Oshkosh, and he just praised the community on what great hosts we are, and we do. We're great at rolling out that red carpet. So when we started hearing these things, it started to click in my mind, well, maybe we don't think of ourselves that way, but outsiders definitely think of us that way. So that's, I don't know if I changed your mind on it. But
I understand. I do. I appreciate that explanation and so forth, because that does make sense to me, Mark. It does. You know, but how is this going to work then if we're not going to get rid of the corporate logo, the wave, which dovetails nicely with Winnebago County's wave? You know, they kind of go hand in hand. Are we not going to be called then Oshkosh on the Water, or will some still call it Oshkosh on the Water because you've got the wave logo, and you know, those who are marketing a brand, will they call it Wisconsin's Event City?
Well, I think from our standpoint, we're certainly going to help promote the brand, and I think we will talk about Wisconsin's Event City, because I think that's something we can be proud of. Whether we do away with the wave, I think, is another issue, because there's so many people that use the wave in different forms. It's expensive to change logos, and I don't want to do it lightly. And right now, I don't have any intention of doing that because of that. But I don't think they are at cross purposes either. A few years ago, just before I left my previous community up in the Fox Cities, the Fox Cities Convention and Visitors Bureau started branding themselves as Wisconsin Shopping Place. And there were some people that some people don't realize that. I don't know if you realize that, but they advertise themselves to outsiders as Wisconsin Shopping Place. And why? Well, they have a mall just like so many other communities have malls, but they also focused on some of the specialty shopping elsewhere. But that was their marketing scheme. That doesn't change Appleton with their Apple logo or anything like that. It just said, for purposes of marketing outside, there's what we're going to do. I think we need to support that, and we got to support it in several ways. One is to the degree we can help support the logo and the brand. Let's do that. Let's say, hey, we are Wisconsin's Event City. We're also Oshkosh on the Water, and did you realize that we've got these great water facilities as well? That's why we have great events. So cross-promote both of them so that we can go. But having said that, I
like that idea, though.
I was just the other day, I was pulling out I was going through some files that somebody asked me to take a look at, and I saw a city letterhead from the 1960s, and it said, in the heart of Winnebago land. No Oshkosh on the Water, just talked about in the heart of Winnebago land. And I said, well, I don't think I ever remember seeing that before. So things do change over time. But the Event City is really more of a brand, and that doesn't lend itself to our corporate logo. Works great for Convention and Visitors Bureau that turns their marketing materials over every year. They turn over constantly.
Right.
So they can play off the events, and we talked about different ways they can play off that the events, whether it's a small private event or big events like EAA. They've got a lot of wiggle room with that. But after a while, a brand gets tired, and you got to redo it. So I think it's going to be successful, and I give it a little time, and
All right.
we'll see
you've
what
changed
happens.
my mind a little bit here.
Well,
You've swayed me a little bit. See, I'm not an unreasonable
You were
person.
extremely open-minded.
But one of the things that I read, I think it was on the Northwestern's website, kind of attached to the story, the comments. Someone was concerned it was that these 2 tickets were going to show up on squad cars, and I mean that's ridiculous because they have, of course, their own department logo. They don't use the wave. So
And you have to look to make sure it fits the appropriate atmosphere. And tickets on cars might carry a different connotation.
It could very well, yes. Now, speaking of name changes, and I don't want to get into this a whole lot because folks from the Senior Center are going to come on at another date. But there's a movement afoot to change the name of the Senior Center. Is that something that they can do on their own unilaterally, or does that need council approval to do?
Oh, it probably needs council approval or at least some type of administrative review. I think it's an appropriate exercise for them to talk about, and if they want to change something, then you have the Committee on Aging that is very devoted to that. I don't think they would do anything lightly. I think there are a couple people that are very interested in it, but the feedback's been all over the place. So it's sort of like, it is kind of like the branding. You get reactions and...
Yeah, I mean, between these two things, it's got a lot of people's tongues wagging. It really does.
I think what they're trying to do is, how can we appeal to people who are approaching retirement age to let them know this facility is for you and we want you to be aware of it, and does changing the name, does it help bring more people in and make it more inclusive, or does it just scare people away? My own personal opinion is, I'm used to the Senior Center and I know what that is. I've seen children's museums change their names to some real obscure name, and it's like, well, what happened to the Children's Museum? It's the
Doesn't
opposite.
Appleton have something like that?
I wasn't going to use it by name,
Well,
but
I
since
did.
you did,
I did.
yeah, now they call it the Museum for Kids. I don't get that. I like Children's Museum. It makes sense. You know what it is. We'll see how it goes. And
well, I said to Bob Cornell, who's going to be one of the people on the show, I said to him, Bob, because he was talking about reaching out to a younger crowd,
50 guys like me.
The 50 and like me, the 50 and up crowd. And I said, well, then just do more marketing. I said, AARP, you can join AARP when you hit 50.
And they remind you every month until you join.
Yes, but it's a reasonable, it's $1 a month. You can't go wrong. Anybody can afford that.
Who's doing the commercial now?
Well, because I joined, hey, the benefits far outweigh the cost of $1 a month. But, that's Association of, American Association for Retired Persons. Well, who can retire? Hell, you got people who are 65 and they're not retiring.
Yeah.
So, and they seem to be able to attract people that aren't, in their golden years per se. So, I said to Bob, just market. You're going to have to market a new name. So just spend that time and energy on marketing it, or leave it Oshkosh Senior Center and, have a little tagline attached to it. And that covers both things.
It'll be you go after Bob with that one. Let's see where you go.
I will. Okay, let's before we run out of time here, let's talk about the tax bills and the upcoming budget, because it's going to be a fierce thing, isn't it?
Well, it is. I haven't even. The departments have submitted their budgets, and I'm going to be starting to do budget reviews just next week. So by the time this airs, I will be in the middle of doing that. A lot of questions, but I can say one thing: every budget is the 2011 budget was really kind of started to get set in stone when 2009 kicked in, because the budget's usually a 2-year behind what the economy was, and the economy in 2009 was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So that's what we know we're going to be facing in 2011, because it's all what the economy did in '09 that determines it. And we know that in many cases property values declined. And in many cases businesses went out of business, and revenues on our side went down. Obviously the state revenues went down significantly, and we get about 16% of our general fund comes from state shared revenue, which is a big mystery right now because the state hasn't adopted their biennial budget. Doesn't get submitted until after a new governor's seated, and we haven't even gotten to the gubernatorial primary yet.
Right.
So we don't even know when what that amount will be, and that money actually comes to us in November. So we wait the entire year, and then 2 months left in the year we get the money from the state. And if the state is divided on how they want to deal with their budget issues, we may not know until September, October what money we're going to get for this year, for 2011, and we're looking at a year away. So there's a lot of mystery in what we're going to do. So we're going to have to be very conservative on how we address that, because we just can't count on the state delivering the goods when they don't have the goods. And it's the tough part. It's not knowing what to tell people, or I have to make an assumption eventually and say, these are the assumptions I'm going to make, right or wrong, and we're going to make budgetary decisions based on that. Yep. And we hope we don't make such bad decisions that we dip into our fund balance. Our fund balance is there for a reason, and if we dip into it, then we're really going to hurt ourselves in the long run. So the departments are aware of it, the council's aware of it, and we'll be presenting a budget that is based largely on assumptions that we're hoping will be a little clearer as time goes on.
Right. Taxes, there's a cap on how much taxes can go up, though, right?
There is, but the state legislature can change that, and with the mystery of not knowing what that might be, if they decide they want to change it, then we're stuck by that. I believe right now the cap is about 3%. So we'll go in with an assumption that the max we can raise is 3%. And with property values going down, if everybody's property value goes down, we're still just collecting 3% more. So the tax rate may go up, but the tax bill is just going to be 3% more. So that's kind of the worst case. Although debt service is always that little extra factor, and we've been borrowing a lot to get a lot of these projects done. Sure. That could impact it. But the council's aware of those things, and they want to make sure that we are careful about those. And we have to. In this economy, we just can't say, well, we just willy-nilly. So we're going to have to be cautious about that.
Well, with things being as really so tight as they're apparently going to be, do you anticipate having to make some layoffs and or cutting back on some of our services or quality of life services?
I think the potential's there, and it'd be inappropriate for me to say which things I think would be.
Right.
But one of the things we're looking at, it goes back to one of your first questions tonight, had to do with recycling. Recycling has been so successful, I think we may need to take a look at perhaps automating our refuse operations, which would make us more efficient. I can tell you that first year with recycling, we saved ourselves $435,000 by switching over to automated recycling. If that's the type of savings we can anticipate, I think we have an obligation to seriously take a look at automating our refuse process in order to achieve some savings. Now, we should do that whether the economy is bad or good. We should just be looking at those things all the time. But they kind of jump out at you and say, take a look at this now, because this might be a way to help stave off some other reductions we might have to make elsewhere. So the refuse superintendent, Kevin Ewan, and I have had discussions about that. I mentioned that at State of the City, and I think it's something that we're seriously going to have to take a look at. Now, I know some people might say, 2 carts in my yard, I can't stand the first one. But the reality,
got problems keeping the one cart hidden.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll put them in camo colors or something, but I think we need to take a look at that as a serious matter, because that's one way we can truly save money by being more efficient in our operations.
Would that require the purchasing of additional trucks then?
Well, we're always buying new trucks, because those things take a beating, and they need to to change
right,
over.
but these that were purchased for this automated process, that they came at a higher price tag, didn't they? Or am I wrong on that?
A little bit of a higher price tag, but the price is coming down because they're becoming more commonplace. So once it becomes more efficient, you can do more of those. And so we're taking a look at that, but it's the big picture you have to look at. It's a lot of trucks that we'd have to change over. So do we change over gradually? Do we change over all in one fell swoop? We might have to change gradually to make it happen so we don't have to incur all the capital costs associated with that. So those are things we have to take a look at, and we're going to be talking to the council about those types of things.
Okay. Anything else with regard to the general operating budget that I realize that you haven't begun budget hearings and that kind of thing yet, but anything that kind of jumps out or sticks out like a sore thumb right now for you?
Well, the council has asked us to take a look at fees. We've found that that's a very big process, but we have a brand new long-range finance committee that just had their second meeting this past week, and they want to take a look at that fee study because they want to develop some philosophies on what fees are. And some people feel our fees are too high, other people feel they're too low. So let's get to the heart of the matter. Are they too high? Are they too low? The truth is, some are probably considered too high and some are too low, and we have to say, is this any way we can capture the costs of providing services? Now, and I've said this before, if you double your fees, which wouldn't happen, but if you doubled every fee you have, you're still not raising that much money. So you have to be cautious about those things.
Sure.
So the other one is stormwater. Everybody knows about stormwater, that we've got to do something about it. Well, the only way we can do something about it is spending money. So we will definitely see an increase in our stormwater fees, and it's necessary. We can't sit there and say, well, we don't want our stormwater fees to go up, but we really got to take care of stormwater. We do really have to take care of stormwater, and we're spending $20 million plus this year on stormwater improvements. The money doesn't grow on trees.
Right.
We have to. We're all going to have to dig deep into our pockets to pay for that. And I would think that if council's taking a look at taxes versus stormwater fees, they know that stormwater fees are very necessary. So I could see them going that route. Again, council has to make the final call on that, but stormwater fees cannot be ignored.
Sure. Want to touch on roundabouts. We've got our second roundabout now, and I personally like them. I don't, it's just, you just have to learn a different way of driving, that's all. It just kind of goes back to the basics. But I know that there have been a number of accidents at the one at Jackson and Murdoch. I suspect, though, that will come down in time as people get accustomed to it. But one of the big complaints has been, people speeding through there. Will the police be doing any kind of speed monitoring in there to make sure that that's,
They've stepped it up because of that reason,
Okay.
and their observations are that people are going too fast, and they are writing tickets. So if you and people need to realize that even if nobody's in that intersection, no pedestrians, no cars, no nothing, you still need to slow down to 15 miles an hour. And even though it says yellow, the police can cite you for driving too fast for conditions, and a roundabout says go 15 miles an hour. So the police are out there writing tickets, and they'll continue to do so. And we're also keeping an eye out for pedestrians. We've heard from plenty of people who have told us stories about close calls. And I'm glad they're close calls. They're not no accidents, but we don't want to take that chance. And there are pedestrian crossings there, and state law already says you have to yield to pedestrians, and the police are on the lookout for that. And if you think that pedestrian has to wait for you, you're wrong. You have to wait for the pedestrian. So if you're out there and you're hearing the sound of my voice, slow down in roundabouts and yield to pedestrians as well as the traffic already in the roundabout.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with the roundabouts, that leads me into construction. We've still got a lot of road construction going on in the city, and it's going to continue for a while. Can the police, I know they've got their hands full with all kinds of stuff, but can they do anything at all about these people who, they block intersections, and you can't turn down the street, you can't get off the street. It's already, it's illegal to block an intersection. And it's not just in construction areas. You can go down Sawyer Street, especially now with school back in session, and from Witzel all the way back a few blocks, these people are blocking off the streets. You know, they're just pulling right up next to the, or right behind the car in front of them, and you can't get down these streets. And the people who live on those streets can't get off of them.
It creates gridlock. I think I can say the police department does look for it, and when the police squad's cars are there, it's amazing how people comply with that. But when they're not there, it's this, I guess, dog-eat-dog mentality. But people need to just realize that if you do that, you're blocking every bit of progress. So the car down the street is trying to make a turn. If somebody's blocking the intersection, he's not going anywhere, and then you're not going anywhere. And that's how gridlock is truly created. So the public needs to be aware of it. The police do look out for it, but again, I think it's harder to catch than speeders because it's
probably so.
You got to be right there. So they're aware of those things. 9th Avenue has been really tough. 21's been really tough, and it's not going to be any easier next year because when 9th Avenue is closed, we're going to have the same issues. So the police are aware of it, but people just have to be. They just have to behave themselves and just be patient. You'll get home. I lived in California for 8 years. This is a piece of cake. So you know, people need to realize that you'll get home, you'll get to work, you'll get to the kids' games, you'll get to the grocery store. Just slow down a little bit, and things will be better.
Okay. And real quickly, I want to touch on this too, because this was something that came up at the last council meeting before we're taping this. There were some special assessments for a couple of property owners along the Highway 41 corridor. And the assessments were exorbitant, but they own a lot of land. And, you know, as a taxpayer sitting back, I was very frustrated by this council that, with the exception of, I forget, well, I think they all voted in favor of turning this thing down.
It was unanimous vote.
Yeah, you know, I was very frustrated watching this discussion and then watching the ultimate vote because, you know, they're watching out for these two property owners who have a lot of money, and yet who watches out for, you know, the average taxpayer who gets hit with a special assessment, and it may be a hardship for them. And the other part of this, as you well know, and you guys pointed out, I think maybe it was either you or Dave Potek pointed it out, these business owners are saying, well, the property is not worth that much, and yet they've got some of it, maybe all of it, listed for sale for huge amounts of money. Can you just elaborate just a little bit on this?
Well, a couple lessons we learned. One, I think, is talking to council members after the fact. One of the concerns they raised was that because this is a blacktop project, our asphalt paving projects, we don't give a lot of advance notice to the property owners. So whether that's a legitimate gripe or not a legitimate gripe, it's a valid criticism for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to do more advance notices. Secondly, I think you're right in terms of you know, the fact that the property owners, the land prices are by law devalued because these are agricultural properties. By law, we can't assess more than you know, $1,500 an acre to these properties. So their prices are artificially set low. So the fact that they have large assessments for these parcels goes with that. Interestingly, downtown assessments were slightly under $150 a foot. These assessments out there were about $50 a foot. So even though the assessments were very large, it was because of large frontages, as you mentioned. And
sure.
I think we need to understand that scale, but ultimately we got the message clear. We got to do a better job of notifying people, but we need to get streets done, and we're going to keep going.
All right. Well, on that issue, we'll probably come back again. So
All
anyway,
righty.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Well, no, I mean, it'll come back before the council. It won't necessarily come up here again.
You never know.
Well, it could come up here again. Anyway, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.